Hey guys, how are you? On this part of the domain so far, we had created our domain audit.local. In that domain, technically, it's one server and two PCs. The server is my domain controller, and the two PCs, and I have few users and few security groups and few OUs and few resources in that domain. Now, my domain is nice, it's growing, I'm getting up better. So, but I'm still having only one domain controller, which is not very smart way of working in the real life. In the real life, you have to have multiple servers, just in case, la samah Allah, one of the server crash, or let's say one of the server is getting Windows update and it needs to be restarted. And during the restart time, people will not be able to access the resources and they cannot authenticate. That's why they have multiple domain controllers. So in this examples, we're going to add an extra domain controller. The extra domain controller, it's additional domain controller, is technically another server machine. So it's a server machine that I have to create, and in that server machine, it's my additional domain controller. So that server machine will technically control the same domain. So it's not going to control additional domain. It's the same domain. So the domain that is going to control is still audit.local. Good. It will have its own IP address, which is logical because we cannot have two computers having the same IP address on the network. So we'll give her whatever that IP address that she's going to take, 2, 3, 5, 6, 16, whatever your IP address range allow you to do that. Good. And it would has its own settings. The two domain controllers will actually control the same domain, the same OUs, the same groups, the same user. So it will not be differentiated. As we said, it's made for duplication. We'll see that in the next video. You can watch that later. Now, that's my additional domain controller. So this is just a photocopy of this. Now, in the real life, we might have different scenarios happening in the real life. So different scenarios like what? So like my research department. So my organization have a research department. The research department is very active. They are very specific situation. They are having very specific stuff or very skill stuff or something like this. Or the sales department or anybody like this. So this is when we have to create something called a child domain. A child domain is technically still part of my main domain, but he will become like a small box in my domain. He will become a small child domain. That small child domain will have his own domain controllers. He will have his own domain controller. His domain controller, so this is the child domain controller or the child DC. It will control the small domain or the subdomains. In that case, it's sales.audit.org. So this is the child domain. Of course, it will have its different IP address range, whatever that IP address range that I'm going to use. Good. And it will has its own users. It will has its own groups. It will has its own PCs. That's child domain. But still, the most important part that there is a very good relationship between the child domain and the father domain. These two guys are still on one big domain or one big tree, let's call it, if we are talking to the tree system that we were talking about in the beginning of this class. So the child domain and the father domain are still part of a tree, and that way they are trusted between each other. So for example, in the sales team, they will have their own account, they'll have their own group policy, they'll have their own OUs, they'll have their own security group, they'll have their own shares, but still somebody from the main department. Good. So let's say they will not have their own accounting business. So somebody from the main domain, a user here, maybe Miss Rima, she's my accounting director or accounting software, she will still be able to access the resources that are available on the subdomain. At the same time, somebody from the subdomain, there is somebody here in the sales team in the subdomain. I'm trying to draw, it's not drawing. Yeah, he still can access the shares and the resources on the network outside the subdomain. So that's for the situation for the real life business. In the real life business, you will be able to do something like this, where you will create a child domain for your business, like Hassan. For example, at Qatar University, we had this. Qatar University, they created a subdomain for the student called student.cnaq.qu.edu. Whatever. Good, that was a child domain under that. We've seen it a lot in businesses also, where the business, for example, will become Hawaii.com. Good. Under Huawei.com, they will create sales.huawei.com, maintenance.huawei.com, customer support.huawei.com, or for example, Qatar.huawei.com, France.huawei.com, Turkey.huawei.com. They will create subdomains under that. So that's available in the real life. They are all still part of the big domain and they can share stuff, but they have subdomains. So this is what we call it a child domain or a subdomain. So this is the second scenario that, or the third scenario that we are going to talk about. First scenario, adding a child domain, adding a duplicate domain controller or additional domain controller, then creating a child domain. The third scenario that we are going to have is we can add a new domain. What do you mean by new domain? So my company, Audi.local, has grown up, alhamdulillah, and I, as an owner, Mr. Audi, as an owner, I decided to start up a new business. The new business that I'm going to start up, it's about importing milk and cheese and dairy stuff. Good. And my new company, my new milk company, it's called Milko. Good. So I'm going to create a new domain, and that domain is, let me just give it another color so it will be easier to see. So that domain that I'm going to create that domain as Milko. Local. So this is my domain account, milko.local. I'm creating that domain account. So that's a separate domain by the name of it, but it can still be part of my tree. Of course, that domain now, Milko domain, he will need to have his own domain controller. So we have to get him his own domain controller for him. Again, it's another machine that he have to have in there. And that machine is technically, so it's a domain controller that control the additional domain. And that domain is no longer Audi.local, it's Milko. That's local. Good. So that's now my new business. In that business, I have my own employees, the guys, the bringing cows, bringing milk, bringing manufacturing, bringing faculty, whatever I need to do there. But I don't have a very good legal system here, but I have legal employees here. I don't have a very best financial guys in the Milko domain. I have them here. So I still need that ability to communicate between the new domain, good, and the original domain. I still need to be able to have this kind of communication between the two. So in that case, let me just change the color here for the arrow so we can notice it. They need to have this. So again, because Mrs. Rima here, she is the best accountant ever, she will be accessing the data and the information in this domain, including their bills and invoices and all this stuff, so she can actually help them. At the same time, Mr. David here, who is like the whatever job he's doing here, he can access resources from the main servers and the main data. So this is a domain part of my main forest. So now I'm having a very big forest. Good. That forest contains my Audi domain. It's contained the child domain of Audi, so sales.audi.local, and it's contained my milko.local. So this is my big forest. Good. And remember, when you create something like this, all the users in the forest, whether they are something at milko.local or something at sales.audi, something at sales.audi.local or something at audi.local, whether it's he's here or here or here, it doesn't matter. The user can access resources across the network, and whether the resource is here or here or here, users can still print for it. So for example, if Mrs. Rima from accounting visited the milk factory to work in there, the printer in the milk factory, she can use it to print on it. At the same time, when one of the guys in the milk factory come to the head office to have a meeting, he can use the printer and the scanner and the photocopier that are available in that because they are part of the same forest. Good. So this is the step that we are going to do. So in the lab paper right now, this is what you guys are supposed to do. You are supposed to create the additional domain controller. You are supposed to create the child domain controller, and you are supposed to create the additional domain. So these are the 3 steps that we have to do in the lab. Good. There is one further step that we are going to do in the future. It's not in the lab paper yet, which is creating another forest. What does that mean in the real life? That means in the real life, good, that me, Audited Oracle, I went out and I bought another business. So that business is up and running. It's already functioning business. So it already has its own employees. It already have its own hardware, infrastructure, domain. It has everything in there. Good. And that company, let's call it, for example, Ferrari.com. So inshallah, I'll buy Ferrari.com someday. Good. And that Ferrari.com, it has its own domain controllers, maybe five, maybe six, maybe seven of them. It has their own employees, 5, 6, 7,000 employees. It has all the shares, all the networks, all the printer, all the settings. It has all these kind of stuff. So that's his own forest. Good. So they have their own forest. Good. So I bought that business with everything inside it, with their IT equipment. Now there is a step. What we can do is having the relation between these two forests now. Good. So now I want to link my forest. Not anyway. So I'm going to create this forest. I'm going to create a link between this forest and my forest here. So we both are able to access our files and folders and stuff from both forests. So since now I own Audited Local and I'm owning Ferrari, good, I want to give my own accountant, Mrs. Rima, control over Ferrari Finance. I'm not sure if those guys are doing a good job or not. And then I want to give the guys from finance, from the Ferrari team, access to my domain when they come to my headquarters and access my resources and access my stuff. So this is the steps that we are going to do. In the current lab, we are going to create additional domain controller. We're going to create child domain controller. We are going to create additional domain inside the same forest. And later on, in different situation, we're going to join a different forest to my lab. I hope that you guys have an idea about the next 4 steps in the lab. So please watch it and be careful about them.